So this time we're gonna have ourselves a little exercise and start from scratch with the demo head, of course, and we're gonna try to get something a little closer to what you see in the splash image for this chapter, because you might be looking at it and going, I kind of want to sculpt something like that. Well, I'm going to show you how to get something close to that. So first, of course, we opened up the demo head. Let's just go ahead and smooth out what we have. I'm not going to worry about doing the subdivision level thing like we did before. We'll just keep it nice and clean. Give ourselves a little bit of an area to sculpt in. Okay. And first we're going to go ahead and select the brush palette up here, and you'll have your clip brushes right here. So we're going to start out with your clip brushes. Are basically a way for you to cut off, slice, whatever pieces of your mesh together, off, or whatever. So if you clicked clip circle, and you have to make sure you're holding Control Shift to do these. And oh my god, scary. Okay, well, it's going to cut out the part that you select with that. Okay? You might find this useful in some circumstances if you're really trying to go artsy with it. But obviously, since we have symmetry on, if you go across diagonally, you're gonna get some crazy artifacting and crazy stuff like that. It's gonna work the same way with your other clip circle center brush, which is basically the same thing, but you're just drawing it from the center. Okay. And with the clip curve brush, it's basically acting like a knife. You drag it across and you slice off that part. Not a whole lot of instances to where you're going to use this, but it will certainly have uses, especially with hard-edged geometry and stuff like that, if you really need to get like a super defined edged. So rectangle, same thing, obviously. Creepy. So moving on, you have one of my favorite brushes, the Damn Standard brush. It's actually the Damien Standard brush. It's defined as the Damn Standard brush, which is pretty funny actually to me. But this is essentially your pinch combined with your standard brush. This can be super useful when defining details in really sharp contrast to each other. Make sure you keep an eye on your Z intensity to control it, because it makes a big difference. But this is going to give you something really cool. This is going to give you nice deep values in the folds of the skin of the face, and also in folds of clothing and stuff. You get some really nice defined geometry with this. This is definitely one of my favorite brushes. So we'll not mess around too much with it. You get the idea. Also, just another little trick. If you hold Alt, like you're doing the subtractive sculpting, well, by default, the Damien Standard brush is subtractive. So when you hold Alt, you're going to be adding. And this can define a really nice edge if you do it that way. Super, super, super useful. So you get the idea. Really, really cool stuff. Can't stop using it. It's so cool. But we'll move on. Okay. Come down here. Hit the D key. You'll have your Displace Brush. Click on that. This is pretty much what it says it is. It displaces the geometry. And the more you hold in place, the more it displaces it. You can give him some cool little devil horns here. Let's make the brush size a little smaller. Intensity a little bit less. And we'll just keep drawing out until we get what we want. Draw it about to there. And now what we can do with this is select our move tool. And right around the edges here, bring them up just a tad. Don't worry about it deforming your geometry too much. The topology is going to be off. We can always fix that quickly by just dividing to another subdivision level. It'll add more geometry there. Get a little smoother. And then to further define this, we'll go ahead and use the pinch tool that we used earlier. And that'll give it a little bit sharper, because we want his horns to be nice and sharp. Nice and pokey. Yeah. Pretty cool stuff, right? So, that's that. Moving on. You down your Flatten Brush. Hit F. Flatten. And again, that's self-explanatory. A lot of these brushes really are self-explanatory. But if you're not sure of it, don't be afraid to experiment. Flatten is going to flatten it. Flatten wherever you hit. This can be kind of useful if you want to get a more defined, like just say a brow line or something right here. You want it to be more defined. It's more useful for hard edge stuff, not so much for organics, but it can have its uses in organics if you know where to apply it. Can be really cool. Okay. Next I'll show you the insert brushes. Now before I show you the insert brushes, let's go ahead and get rid of his ear completely. Hold shift for your smoothing and just smooth away this ear. Okay, well it's not smoothing away enough. So let's bring him all the way back down to his lowest subdivision level. And go over that ear again with the smoothing. Get rid of it completely until you see nothing there. Okay? Yeah, it's bad topology, but we're not worried about it. Bring your subdivision level back up and smooth out any artifacting that you have left there. And then, oh no, he has no ears. What do we do? Well, we can use the insert brush for this. And you have a few different options with the insert brush. You have your facial features. If you, for some reason, want a head to grow out of him, we'll have to make sure the subdivision levels are only one. You'll have to delete your other subdivision levels to use the insert brushes. Oh my gosh, look at that. He has a head growing out of him. He has two heads growing out of him. Crazy. That is a pretty interesting thing you can do. But we'll keep it practical. Of course, you can do this with any of these. You can do it with your lips, the nose, a hand. But we went the ear. We need to insert an ear, give him another one. So go ahead and do that, and insert that there. It's very funny looking. Let's actually undo that. Let's do it from the side here. It's slightly more accurate. It still looks funny, but we can fix that. Let's go back to our move tool. Make sure it's large enough and just move it in. And shape it how we like it. Okay, obviously it's a harsh edge here. It's not transitioned. And that's because it's not technically part of this mesh. It is, according to ZBrush, but it's not merged in there that way. The way you can do this is to either remesh it or use Dynamesh. But we're not going to do that because that would involve getting into another operation and possibly losing a lot of the topology of the mesh. It might smooth out too much to where we'd have to go in and re-add all this detail. We don't really want to do that. So anyway, that's how that works. Just for the sake of keeping this as one uniform mesh, just go ahead and undo, and undo, and undo, until you get back to the original. Because I just wanted to show you how the insert mesh worked, just so you had the idea. Okay, so just go all the way back. I know I wasted your time, but that's the way these things work. So once you get back to your original mesh, we'll move on to the next brush. Go to your layer brush. Okay, when you go into the brush palette here, you hit L. It disappears. Why does it disappear? Because the layer brush is the only one that starts with the L. There's no other brush that starts with an L. But that's alright, because that's what we wanted. So we got our layer brush on, and what the layer brush basically is adding more or less a extra thickness layer to wherever you lay down the stroke. You can see we can go over our own stroke. As long as we're holding down in the same stroke, it'll keep everything on the same level. So you can fill in anything you want. Give yourself a more defined shape. Except, of course, for when it crosses over on the symmetry, it's going to raise it another level. And the same idea when you go back and you stroke again over the same thing. Okay. You can use this to as an alternative to creating a mask from a masked off mesh. Say, we can create a mask ourselves with just this, but it's not the most accurate. It's just an alternative method. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Moving on. I'm going to use the rake brush. Back up here. Hit R for rake brush. Once again, it's the only one that starts that. So let's bring our focal shift back down to our default. I think we had it up pretty sharp for a while there. Now the rake brush is basically a kind of rake. I don't really know how else to define it, but it's like a digging in kind of cut in stroke. And you're going to need some pretty good resolution for those curves to show up. So let us just go ahead and give him another subdivision, because we're going to do something with him anyway. You can bring him up a little bit smoother. You can see it's a little more definitive. And if we use this with Lazy Mouse turned on, let's say we use it for our hair. Okay. Yeah, it's not necessarily realistic, but it's there. It's discernible as hair. You can see this stuff gets tedious after a while, but it's part of the fun of it. You get these details laid down wherever you need them. Start to see your model come to life. So we got hair laid down. Devilish guy going on. Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit too sharply defined, so let's just run the smooth over it a little bit. Lightly. Remember too, whenever you're using any of your brushes, any of them at all, keep an eye on your Z intensity, because you're going to be able to have more control, especially if you have a lower Z intensity. You can kind of just go over it and go over it and go over it until you get to your desired result, instead of maxing it out at 100 or something and overdoing your result, getting rid of all your detail. You might lose it all. So I'd say just stay at a lower intensity and just work your way into the result you want. Okay. Now we already have our horns out, but another alternative way, I think I already showed you before too, is the snake hook. You hit S and you select snake hook down here. Same thing, except that this is going to follow your cursor until you let go, which can be a good thing in some instances, especially if you're using Dynamesh. This is really useful in conjunction with Dynamesh, because snake hook almost always brings your geometry out, and your topology, it screws it up really bad because it just stretches it out so far. But almost like a Loki. But that's just an alternative method to getting horns or spikes or anything like that off of them. Use it with Dynamesh. It's definitely fun to use with Dynamesh. So. Okay. And in the splash image, you can see I had these really defined facial features and everything. Well, that was the result of using the Trim Adaptive and Trim Dynamic brushes. These are both really awesome brushes. Trim Dynamic more so, because what it does is basically treats your mesh like a rock sculpture, to wherein you're chipping off these features, and for every surface you go over, it's going to flatten it out / chip it off a little bit. And you just keep working that in, and you can get some really cool results with that. And you just keep going around and around and around until you get to that result you want. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time doing this, because that's something you should do after this lesson. Go crazy with these brushes. Really just dig in and use every single one of them, even the ones that give you total crap for a result. Use them so you know what they do later, and you know how to use them, and you can go back to them and decide which ones are going to benefit you the most later. So, something like that can get some really cool results sometimes. Okay. And like I said before, in the menus chapter of this series, you can access all these brushes through Lightbox up here. You just click Lightbox and you click on Brush, and this will open all your folders with all these brushes in them. Now, like I said before, some of the brushes aren't loaded by default, and you'll have to go in here and find them. Tracks, for instance. If you already use this one, you get these rivet-like shapes, kind of like the Matrix. Crazy stuff. But I don't think that one is loaded by default, so I had to load it. But definitely explore in your brush palette and explore in Lightbox. You'll find a lot of brushes. A lot of brushes come with it by default, but you just play around with. So with that, just keep on practicing, keep on experimenting, and you'll get a result close to what you want at one time or another. So with that, we'll go ahead and end this chapter and move on to the next one.